Hey everybody, today is Valentine's Day. This is my love song. It's not a love song, it is a love song. Because we are made of pure love. We are made of pure love and divinity. Here to spread a message of love for all beings. That includes the birds and the bees, the ocean and the trees, the pooch and the bacteria buddies. Happy Valentine's. I'm loving all the bugs in my body, on my body. They make me so happy, strong and safe. And for that I am so grateful. Hello friends, welcome back to Mama Mondays. Hello, I am Hannah Ruhamah, the Kombucha Mamma, mother to millions of bacteria around the world. If you have ever tried my kombucha or purchased one of my scobies or milk kefir grains or water kefir grains, you and I, we are connected, for we share microbes in common, and microbes are magic. And magic. What is magic? Magic is when we can't see the mechanism by which something happens, which means we live in a state of magic at all times, for we cannot see gravity and yet we feel its effects. We cannot see our microbes working and yet they are in so many wonderful ways. And so I'm so grateful you're here today on this lovely Valentine's Day. I had been doing a little research on Valentine's Day and found that in fact it was an ancient pagan ritual, one of sex and fertility. So if you're feeling a little, it makes a lot of sense because that is what this time of year was originally intended for. That said, I love that we can expand the meaning of Valentine's Day to include not just our betrothed or our beloveds, but ourselves and our friends. So today is just a day to celebrate love. Not that every day isn't a celebration or a day that warrants that celebration, but today we're going to talk about love and with one of my favorite gals. So I'm super excited to welcome my dear friend, Mira Dessy, the ingredient guru, to our Mama Monday today. And we are going to be talking about our love relationship with food and in all the many ways that we are connected to ingredients that help to support our microbiome, our energy levels, our system. You know, one of the really neat things about being a human being on this planet is, unlike plants, photosynthesize and get all their nutrients from the sun. We absolutely get nutrients from the sun, but we also are not able to create our own vitamin C. And so by our very nature, we are required to eat foods that come from outside of ourselves. And that has created a lot of fun and excitement, but it also means that over the many years, there's a lot of sort of processed foods and ingredients that actually don't serve our biome, our microbiome, our organism, our health very well. And so I'm excited to welcome Mira Dessy, the ingredient guru. I'm going to bring her on in just a minute. Let me read quickly some of the highlights of who she is. So she is an author, speaker, holistic nutritionist, and real food advocate. Woman after my own heart. She emphasizes the importance of a healthy lifestyle through whole foods. After experiencing years of debilitating digestive issues and health challenges, I know we can all relate, Mira realized that the healing strength of food, after she learned to eat right, helped her regain her health. So her recovering connection to food and eating made such a powerful impact that she returned to school and earned certification as a nutrition educator. And she is a wonderful woman. She's very passionate about what's in and on our food and how this affects our health. And truly, it's not just what you eat, because it can be in what you eat as well. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Mira on, and we're really excited to hear what she has to say. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in. We're really excited to answer them for you today.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. Yes, how wonderful. Thank you for having me on today.
Yes, well, I love to talk about food, and I think that so much of, I feel like what's happened over time is because of media and whatnot, we have come to have a contentious relationship sometimes with our own selves, with our own bodies. We often feel like I feel sick, I feel terrible, I'm at battle with my body. And I think that's a really unfortunate and difficult place to be in. And I know I've certainly had my own struggles with that, and I know you have your own, and we're eager to hear your struggles and how you overcame them. But I just feel like this is such a wonderful day to sort of share our love of the foods that help support a healthy body. So I'm just so grateful you're here today, Mira. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on. And one of the things that I want to point out is that I love what you said about how contentious things have become, not because I love that it's become contentious, but because I believe that's at the root of many of the things that are going on. Unfortunately, there's a lot of what I call tribalism in food these days. Oh, if you're not X, then like this is the only way to be. And the truth of the matter is we're all bio-individual. There is no one size fits all diet for everybody, except of course, eat less crap. but, but other
Yes.
than that, like we need to find what works for us. And the other thing that I like to point out to people is our dietary needs change throughout our lifestyle. This is where we need to develop that internal awareness to connect to our bodies and understand what we need. And the example that I like to give to point out how true this statement is that, our diet does change over our lifetime. Otherwise, we would all still be drinking breast milk. So, we really need to think about what is it that your body needs to intuitively learn to connect to how you feel when you consume certain foods and to learn to shut off the manufacturer manipulation, because that unfortunately is a huge part of how we got to where we are.
Couldn't agree more. And in fact, what I call that, what you're talking about here is call it closing the feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we need to tune into our bodies and how consuming different foods makes us feel in order to understand the effect they're having on us. And so when we say here at Kombucha Kamp, trust your gut, of course, we're saying don't trust mine, don't trust somebody else's. You have to listen to your body, but it also isn't trust your taste buds. Because as you're going to share with us, there's a ton of ways in which that's manipulated into,
Oh, yeah.
making us think it tastes delicious, only later to then have bloating, cramping, ill effects, acne, right? There's so many ways in which our body says, hey, this food source isn't appropriate for you. But sometimes if we're not paying attention, we get confused. And so when I say trust your gut, it doesn't just mean whatever tastes delicious. It means closing that feedback loop, listening to how your body's reacting. And I feel like kombucha is a really easy way to start to make that connection, because when you drink kombucha on an empty stomach, you can literally feel it working inside of your body. Do you have other foods like that you feel like, you can quickly tune into how they're making you feel?
I do. One of my favorites is kraut, and I serve it with almost every meal. I love kraut. My personal favorite is a kraut that's more than just cabbage. So it's got some other veggies in there. Maybe it's got a little caraway or a little dill or something, just to enliven the flavor of it with those wonderful gut healthy spices. But, when for me, mostly it tends to be the fermented foods that you can really sort of feel in your body. Your taste buds kind of like, I'm starting to salivate just thinking about it. But your taste buds kind of wake up and your tummy starts to grumble a little bit and your body's like, yes, because that is deeply nourishing food. And I love that. And then one of the other things that is really wonderful to me is when you have the opportunity, for example, to go to a CSA, and if you can eat while you're picking, because you're getting it, like it's so fresh, and you can just feel the nutrition and the deep nourishment that you're getting from this deeply fresh, off the vine, sun ripened, fully nutritious food.
Yeah, I agree. In farmers market or CSA, community supported agriculture, sometimes you're just picking up a box with your CSA. But I think that in order to even taste those nutrients, there has to be an initial step of removing
Yeah.
the chemicals of processed food. Because unfortunately, so many of those chemicals will coat the tongue or block up the receptors. And I often find people can't really taste those subtle differences when in fact the nutrients are communicating with you, whether that's through the mineral content or the vitamin content. Like your tongue really is incredibly sensitive and is able to discern those things. And that's one of the things I found, like when you start including fermented foods in your diet, you gradually naturally gravitate away from those processed foods because they just aren't satisfying. Your body starts to be able to perceive the difference between what's entertainment and fluff versus what's something that actually is feeding a need that I have. But before we go way too far down this rabbit hole, tell us a little bit of your story. So how did you become the ingredient guru? We'd love to hear
Oh,
your journey.
thank you. So yeah, I wasn't always the ingredient guru. I actually, the funny thing is, back before I became the ingredient guru, many of my friends would say, "Oh, you're the healthiest eater I know." We belonged to the CSA. We would go out and glean. I made all of our bread from scratch, canned countless quarts of apple sauce, tomato sauce, pickles, vegetables, all kinds of things. And I really thought I was doing well, paying attention to what I was feeding my family. Unfortunately, over time, I began to become sicker and sicker. And there's a lot of different things that happen. So to shrink it all into a nutshell, I had some autoimmune issues that were building that I believe were tied to some of the non-food things that were in my diet. Because even though I was making all of this wonderful food, I was still buying things that had negative ingredients in them. And at a certain point, I got so sick, I was literally living my life on the sofa. I had to choose between getting up to make dinner or getting up to do the laundry. If I wanted to go to bed, I had to go upstairs, lie down at the top, recover, and then crawl to bed. It was really, really devastating. And the joke that I had at the time, which is sort of funny, not funny, was because the sicker I got, the more doctors came into my care team. And my joke was, if there was an IST, I had it: gastroenterologist, cardiologist, neurologist, like I had them all, and a whole bunch of medications to go with it. And I wasn't getting any better. And for me, the genesis, if you will, of the change was 2 medical appointments that I had in 1 week. One was my rheumatologist, who said to me, there's this medication I want to give you, but I don't think your endocrinologist is going to like it, so I'm not going to do it. And I will share that I'm a little slow on the uptake. I was just kind of like, oh, okay. But then as I was driving home, like, that's when the brain kicks in. And I'm sitting there going, well, first of all, aren't you both doctors? Don't you two talk to each other? The answer is not really. And then the other thing was, if you're not going to do it, why are you going to tell me? Like, what does that do for me? And then 2 days later, I had an appointment with a new to me cardiologist. And I thought, because he was new to my care team, he was going to want to hear my whole story. So I started telling him, and he went, Mrs. Dessy, you are getting older. I was 42. And this man was willing to consign me to a sofa for the rest of my life. Now, in his defense, he probably looked like he was about 18. He was probably newly minted out of medical school. He was very young. And so that really infuriated me. And I went home and called my insurance company, screamed holy heck at the woman who answered the phone. Like, I still occasionally send apologies. I don't know her name. I don't know who she is. I'm grateful that she was there, because she was very calm. She wound up sending me for something called an executive checkup, which is where I got to see a whole bunch of doctors who all agreed to stay on my team for the 4 or 5 days that I was at their facility. And out of that came a few minor tweaks to what my other doctors were doing. Unfortunately, nobody really talked about food, but the most important part was they talked to me and they talked to each other, and I realized that it could be different. And I came home determined to make a change. And when I came home, a friend of mine gave me a book about artificial colors. And that rocked my world. And I was like, oh my gosh. And the more I began to research this, the more I began to realize there's this myth that says, oh, just a little bit's okay. It's not so bad, you know, and it's okay because we need it to be this way for different reasons. And the more I began to research it, the more I began to realize that was not true. We don't need these things. They are not food. And there are people like me and like many of the people who are going to listen to this and watch this, who are what I call the chemical canaries. We're the early warning system that is saying this stuff is not good for us. And sure, a lab may say so many parts per million is not dangerous, but I personally am a living, walking testament to the fact that that's not true. Because in 16 years, I went from being diagnosed, my primary diagnosis was ulcerative colitis, to at my last colonoscopy being told that I have no signs of ulcerative colitis in my system. Yes.
That's so huge and nail on the head, right? Like, so much of what we think of food isn't actually food. It's these processing chemicals, it's these preservatives, it's these dough softeners, these gums, these, you know, and again, like you think, oh, well, a small quantity should be fine. But when you realize they're in everything, how do you control for that? And clearly their studies aren't taking into account that people are consuming these types of foods on a daily basis, such that it can lead to this toxicity overload in our systems. And again, every body is different, every system can be more or less sensitive, and it's also cumulative over time. As we know, the liver, if it's not able to process a xenobiotic, it then sequesters it to your fat cells. So you might just be bioaccumulating these, you know, toxins you're not able to excrete over time until you reach that tipping point, and it's like, whoa, I have to wake up, figure out what's going on, and change my diet. So what was your first steps to changing all of those things once your eyes were open to
Sure.
all the additives in our food?
So the biggest one was removing artificial colors from the diet. Like, that was just huge. And it was actually really, really hard. Now, we're very lucky here in the US. Our food label has to say the color and the number. A lot of the rest of the world, England, Australia, Canada, those kinds of things. Well, no, Canada uses red, I think, also, or uses the name, but the others use something called E numbers. So you have to learn, there's some E numbers that are maybe not so bad and some E numbers that are really terrible. So for us, it's really easy. The challenge was I had 3 kids who had grown up eating things that I now knew were not great, and having to find alternatives that they liked, because as I began to discover, like, this became a true rabbit hole. We started with artificial colors, and then the more I started going into it, it's like, oh, look, there's all these artificial sweeteners that are so dangerous for you. There's high fructose corn syrup that's bad for your liver. There's all these preservatives. There's all these things that are disruptive to the gut or cause issues with allergies or other things. Like, it just became this overwhelming mess. And that's actually why I wound up going back to school, because at a certain point it was like, okay, I think I've taught myself everything I can. I need to know more. And I wound up going back to school. The funny thing is, I originally thought that I was going to go into a different niche. And I thought I might go into either, you know, attention-related disorders in kids, because I knew there was a lot of that, and that was highly tied to artificial colors and some of the preservatives, you know, benzoates and things like that. Or the other thing that I was possibly going to go into was gut health, because that was my story. And every time I tried to step outside the ingredient guru lane, it just did not work. And it got to the point where I realized I have this nerdly fascination with looking at what's on the label, but even more importantly, telling people so that they can learn. Because the truth of the matter is, food producers will do whatever they can to convince you that it's not so bad. And they do a lot of truly manipulative things to try to convince you to not read the label, to not pay attention to what's in there. And they are really, really deceptive. And if someone's not there saying, hey, here's a study, here are live experiences from people, here are the things that are going on that are a problem with this, then people are just going to continue to do what they're doing. Because one of the myths of food production that I like to share with people is that food producers aren't really in the business of making food. They're in the business of making money.
That's correct.
And I don't blame them for that. Like those of us who work, we're in the business of making money. The challenge is the way they do it is by making products that are not healthy for us. And even more infuriating, when they're told that certain things are not allowed. For example, a lot of artificial colors in this country, same companies, same product. Over in Europe, no artificial colors. They can do it. They simply
It drives me nuts.
Yes.
It feels so ethically incorrect,
I know.
untenable. I don't even understand how these people sleep with themselves at night. They know that these products are dangerous, are harmful, and are directly related to the obesity epidemic, to the epidemic of autoimmune disease that occurs in this country. And yet there is no attempt to do better because there aren't laws on the books. And why? Because the lobby system is so robust here in the United States. And I know a little bit about lobbying because we do it for the Kombucha Act, and it's just such a frustrating system to engage in. There's, it's just so challenging to try to get anything changed for the better.
The challenge is that it becomes this ongoing debate where very little happens. So back in the 1960s, there was a doctor, and his name was Benjamin Feingold. He was a pediatric allergist at Kaiser Permanente. And he was one of the first people to really begin to make a connection between artificial colors and what was happening with children. Back in the 60s. Fast forward all this time, we have massive amounts of artificial colors. Some of them get removed because they're discovered to be truly dangerous. The rest of them are still in food. And we're going on doing this. Other countries start to remove them, start to require warning labels. There's a landmark study that's done in England that shows that it increases attention-related disorders. It can increase anxiety. It can even affect people who don't have an attention-related disorder. And yet, for the second or third time, the FDA has examined the issue and decided it's not so bad. Like, that pisses me off. There's this landmark study with tens of thousands of children that clearly shows a connection that's very much highlighting prior research, and yet we're still having this issue.
Well, then they just prescribe you medications for those children. So now you have chemicals that are hyperstimulating them in ways that are negative. Then to ease that, you're putting them on other medications. And so we're just bringing people into the pharma system at younger and younger ages with no discernible end date in sight for when we're going to be off of these medications, when we're actually going to be healed from the inside out. So okay, well, we know the problem is dire, and we know that there's, and this is not even talking about, GMOs or
sugar. Sugar is one of the biggest challenges that we have, because you were talking about coating the tongue earlier. One of the biggest challenges that we have is food producers know that we are biologically programmed to seek out sugar, because a long time ago, fruit was not ripe all the time. So when you found it, you had to eat a lot of it because it was brain food. You didn't find that broken tree with honeycomb in it. And if you did, you had to fight the bears for it. Like, we had to work for our sugar. Now it's everywhere, but we are still programmed to want to consume it. And the challenge is they put it in everything, even things that are supposed to be savory, like condiments or crackers or other things like that. We consume so much sugar that it actually manipulates our palate and dulls our ability to taste other things. The good news is you can actually reset your palate by slowly dialing back how much you're consuming. But food producers put it in everything. And then the challenge becomes, let's say you're having a meal where several of the ingredients have excess sugar in them. How much more sugar do you need for your dessert to taste sweet? A baked apple isn't going to do it. You need something that's going to overwhelmingly hit what we have as this mental image of what dessert or a treat should be like. And it becomes really overwhelming. And the challenge is the more sugar we consume across our entire daily diet, again, like you've mentioned, you know, our body can only process it so fast. It's got to save some for later. And where does it save it? Belly fat, mostly. But that visceral fat actually then begins to have an impact on our cardiovascular health, on our blood pressure, on so many different systems. And it really becomes highly problematic. And then, of course, as we know, down the road, we can have things like metabolic syndrome, diabetes, etc.
Yeah, we might differ slightly on this sugar conversation, only because I always say consider the source. What type of sugar are we adding? Because I do know that there is a feedback loop in the brain that when you consume actual sugar, sugar from cane, sugar from a wild grass that human beings have been cultivating for 5,000 years, that there is actually a feedback loop that's closed versus all of these fake sugars like we talked about earlier, high fructose, aspartame. There isn't that same feedback loop. And so people think, oh, I'm having this diet soda and there's 0 calories, but you're not getting that feedback loop closed and you end up over consuming, and now you're putting all these processed chemicals into your body.
And so I'm not opposed to sugar consumption at all in moderation. My challenge is, even if it is cane sugar, beet sugar, you know, maple syrup, honey, whatever, food producers are stuffing it into everything. So I would say, yes, definitely consider the source. You want true, natural, real sugars, but you also want to make sure that it's not sneaking into foods that don't really require sugar because they're meant to be savory, or the amount of sugar that, because, you know, one of the other things that happens is food producers have learned that consumers are getting a little more savvy about reading the label. Yay! And they're looking at the ingredient panel. And because consumers have learned that the ingredient panel is read by volume, so whatever is the most is at the top. If they want sugar not to be the first ingredient, they can put multiple kinds of sugar. I've actually seen food labels that have as much as 7 different kinds of sugar in a product. I'm not kidding you, because they've got rice bran syrup and a little bit of honey and a little malt syrup, and like they just keep adding all these different sugars because they don't want to put sugar as the first ingredient. If you're going to eat sugar, I say make a mindful choice, choose a real sugar, enjoy it. Please don't beat yourself up for eating sugar, but also look at where your sugar sources are so that you can choose when and where and how much you're getting.
We're on the same page. Exactly right. Well, and the other thing that helps to naturally curb sugar cravings, kombucha, fermented foods. Why? Because when we have more of that acid in our body, like, here's the funny thing. Before kombucha, right, this was my sour face. That's my sweet face now. If I have something that's too sweet, my body's just like, oh, hurry up and get some sour kombucha in there to help balance that out. And, you know, kombucha supports a healthy liver. So it makes sense that it's having this balancing effect on something that does drive the liver forward with sugar, with insulin, with glucose, all of that whole process that happens there. But yes, I think you're, you know, reading the label, unfortunately, this is what it's come to. We cannot trust the food producers. And so we have to be label detectives. So, so let's talk a little bit about what are some, do you have some tools, some tricks? How do you help people? Where do you start, right? It can feel really overwhelming. Where do you start?
Well, the first thing that I encourage people to do is really to make a habit of learning to actually read the label. Food producers use something called front of package labeling. They put so many buzzwords on the front and pretty colors and different sizing. Like, they spend tens of millions of dollars trying to figure out what will attract you. So I don't know if you remember, but years and years ago, the whole big thing was whole grains. And so you would look at a package and it would say, you know, 17 different whole grains or so many grams of whole grains in a package, because that was the big thing. And then it shifted, and then it shifted again. It's always shifting. Right now, the big thing is probiotics. So they're trying to stuff probiotics into everything. to paraphrase a joke from Dave Barry, like, I think they would put probiotics in floor polish if it would sell more. You know, they know that people are understanding that that's something that they need. So ignore the front of package labeling, flip that package around, look at the ingredient panel. If it's too long, there's too many. I have looked at ingredient labels where I flip something around, I'm like, I'm not even going to read that. Like, it's not worth it. If it's that many words, you know, it's not a great choice. But the other thing is to really educate yourself. And so I will share a little personal promotion here. I actually wrote a book called The Pantry Principle: How to Read the Label and Understand What's Really in Your Food. There's a whole chapter just on reading the label, but then the rest of the book, and this is a resource book. This is not a read it once and be done. This is meant to come back to as you're learning. Each chapter talks about different things: artificial colors, healthy fats, understanding sugars, like breaking it all down for you. Because the truth of the matter is there's no linear fashion to get to reclaiming real food in your home. And just like we're all bio-individual, our families have a unique culture. You need to figure out what works for your family and what the change is for you. For me, it was artificial color because that's what really got my attention and got me started. For somebody else, it may be hormones, added hormones in their food. For someone else, it could be understanding pesticide load in their food. Like, there's different places that you start. And the object is not to try to do everything at once either, because if you do that, it's really challenging. Start with one small thing, make one change, master that, and then move on to something else. And I promise you, if you just do it a little bit at a time, you're building a sustainable change to your food culture in your home, rather than a race to the finish that then you haven't really incorporated it in a way that you can keep doing it moving forward.
Well, I'm so glad you put everything into one handy volume that people can, like you said, use as a reference book. I think it can be overwhelming. Where do I start? And so they could even just pick a chapter, go with what you're suggesting there, and then gradually build on from there. You know, I think it's so important that we start to recognize those things. And to your point about probiotic, this is the thing that drives me nuts about this conversation. So if you start reading that label, what you'll see, again, here in the United States, they're required to put the full, you know, trademarked strain number on there. And what you're going to see is the exact same probiotic is being put into your chips, into your yogurt, into your whatever it is. And so now, instead of encouraging that diversity that comes from eating traditional fermented foods, or getting your hands in the soil, or just interacting with other human beings where we naturally exchange microbes, you're being monocultured.
Yes.
And there have already been studies showing that, like, people who overconsume acidophilus end up with negative effects, because now you're essentially, again, reverting to a monoculture. And so there's also this movement with probiotics where they really want to pharmaceuticalize those definitions. They want to have these clinical trials validating, and I'm like, great, so make those supplements you have to have a prescription for.
Yeah.
Let those be prescriptive. And there's a push to say, oh, well, fermented foods aren't probiotic because there hasn't been enough research to validate all of these studies. And I'm like, the whole reason anybody even studied fermented foods was because they noticed they had a health benefit on human beings. So to me, the whole conversation is being inverted as usual, because it's dominated by companies that want to vie for the right to patent a strain, a single strain, a multi-strain, whatever it is. But again, it's trying to bypass that which nature has already provided for us with plenty, with wide variety. And if it's the probiotics or the prebiotics or the N-biotics or the symbiotics, or it's the DNA ruptured, or it survives the gut acid, or it doesn't, like, none of that actually matters to me. The fact that you're eating fermented foods in a living format from a wild, multi-diverse, that's the source you want to get your probiotics and your microbes from. And it isn't to say there isn't a place for supplementation, especially knowing the amount of antibiotics that we're exposed to, knowing the amount of gut dysbiosis that exists and contributes to, you know, even worse outcomes when it comes to things like COVID and other ailments. If your gut is in dysbiosis, it doesn't have the ability to protect you and defend you the way it should, because that's where your immune system lives. And so,
and it's also important to remember that these fermented foods, this is not a new thing. Like, one of the things that really upsets me is some of the literature that I see, they're treating it as if this is a new modern thing. This has been around for millennia. Human beings figured out how to do this because they knew that it was good for them and good for their gut. And it also meant that they could be healthier and encourage that microbiome diversity that we need. We have more cells in our gut. We have more microbes in our gut than we have cells in our entire body. It's supposed to be that way. And there's supposed to be so many different cultures. We're not, like you said, we're not supposed to be monocultured. We have different things that do different aspects of managing how we function. And the best thing we can do is to love them by feeding them what they need.
Yes.
So,
well, and it's even how do we get them in the first place? So even the whole history of C-sections, and now, of course, they're starting to swab those babies with the vaginal secretions, because it turns out that's the very first important inoculation of microbes you're supposed to receive, is as you're coming through the birth canal.
Right.
And so it's exciting that there's innovations, because unfortunately there are generations that have completely missed out on this bacteriological heritage, and that has led to poorer health outcomes as a result. But the good news is, of course, is that we can start eliminating these toxic ingredients. We can start increasing the healthy nutrients from our traditional fermented foods, from connecting with our farmers, from going shopping at the farmers market. And I know that some people find that that can be, you know, in their minds, they feel like it's more expensive. Do you find that it is actually more expensive to purchase your food from local farmers? How does that break down for you from a budget perspective?
sure. So I find for certain things, it may be mostly that applies to meats, because the farmers that are showing up at the farmers market are the ones who are doing it the traditional, sustainable or restorative agriculture way. So they're raising that animal longer. They're providing better care for it. And so, yes, it does cost more. The farmer needs to get reimbursed for that. When it comes to the produce side of things, no, I don't really find it's more expensive, because one of the things we have to remember is to step into one of the beautiful things that a farmer's market delivers to us, which is seasonality. We're so used to what I can walk into the grocery store today and buy organic strawberries, but I'm going to tell you, it's not strawberry season. And so, you know, when we think about doing that, and then we look at paying for something at the farmer's market, and we forget that they have what's available because they only have access to what's available. If you look at that same product at the grocery store, it's really not that much more. So we have to remember that some people are thinking in terms of how much they can access at the grocery store, the variety of things that they can access year round, and then seeing that as their sort of overall budget. And when you stop to break it down and look at the farmer's market, like right now at my farmer's market, there's not a lot available in terms of produce, but in another few weeks, there's going to be massive amounts of baby greens and lettuces and things like that. Not a whole bunch of other things yet, because they're not in season. So that is actually another really wonderful way to use the farmer's market to connect with your food, because you begin to reclaim that knowledge of what's in season when in your area.
Well, and I think that anyone listening, go follow the Ingredient Guru on Instagram, like her on Facebook. She shares so much valuable information about what is in season. And you're right, we human beings are evolved to consume a diverse range of nutrients. This is why we find, you know, omega acids in walnuts as well as in beef, right? We're supposed to eat a wide variety of foods and get our nutrients from a wide variety of inputs, not just eating the same, you know, 3 ingredients again and again. And unfortunately, the subsidy system in the United States makes it so cheap for wheat, corn, and soy that we're just constantly, you know, churning out new permutations of these exact same ingredients because they're so dang cheap. And to your point, food companies are just in it to make money and figure out how to addict you with these flavor chemicals. So
we also have to learn to overcome our own instinct. I mean, the truth of the matter is, if you look at behavioral science, as humans, we tend to prefer a limited range of about 20 foods. We just do. you know, we find what our favorites are, and those are the ones we want to consume all the time. But what we really need is nutritional variety in order to take advantage of the density that happens. So when we eat seasonally, we're forced to expand our palate. We're forced to expand what's going on. When we can buy whatever we want, whenever we want, from anywhere we want, all of a sudden we wind up eating the same foods all the time, which unfortunately is not great for gut health, because then you can begin to develop hypersensitivity to certain foods. Proteins can get through the gut wall and that kind of thing. So that's not great. And so that's another reason why, again, having something like kombucha as part of your daily routine is really helpful, because it's supporting that epithelial layer and making sure that the body's in good shape. You still need to have a variety in your diet, but that's another good tool to have in your kit to make sure that you're taking care of gut health.
And herbs, and I mean, we could go on and on with all the wonderful, great things that are out there that just have sort of fallen out of habit. You know, it used to be you would go harvest different herbs out of the garden, weeds, if you will, and turn them into teas and eat them and do different things with them. And like, there's so much phytonutrients in like oregano and thyme.
Yeah.
And even though we only use them in light sprinkles, they're actually contributing antiviral, antifungal, so many benefits to our body that really, you know, nature's medicine chest it has a huge variety, it tastes delicious, and it can push us to be really creative. The problem is the food supply has really like diluted it down to just a few inputs. And we've already seen some of the supply chain issues that can result when our food supply is too centralized. And so I think, again, your strategy, or a person's strategy for surviving sort of what could potentially come in the next few years, especially as these supply chain issues might continue to occur. Make friends with your local farmers, grow a small garden, even on a windowsill. Even if you don't have a bunch of land, you can just plant a few seeds and engage in that process. Like, starting small is actually a really great way, because it also reconnects you to process, to the land, to microbes, to all of the different aspects of what it means to be a human being, right? We're programmed to believe that instant gratification is what we desire, and we're angry if our cell phone is slow or our internet connection has fallen off. But the reality is, as you know, we're process beings. We're here to live through cycles. We're here to evolve in cycles. And we gain more satisfaction when we reclaim those cycles than when we're constantly, you know, competing with all of the instant gratification inputs that are thrown our way. So I love your work. I love what you're doing. I want people to connect with you. How do we find you, Mira?
Oh, thank you. And I just want to say, before I answer that, I love you too. I think the work you're doing is so amazing. I love your energy. I love your drive to educate and support. I think it's truly wonderful. So if people want to connect with me, I am the Ingredient Guru. So my website, The Ingredient Guru. You can find me on Instagram as The Ingredient Guru. I also have a YouTube channel, The Ingredient Guru. And then on Facebook, I am there either as The Ingredient Guru or Mira Dessy. And, you know, I think one of the things that I really want to share with people is, if you go to my website, there is a thing where you can sign up for my newsletter. Because just because I wrote this book does not mean that food producers don't continue to do stupid things to our food. Like, you know, the funny thing is, I go to the grocery store sometimes, not to shop, but to actually sit there and look at all the new things that they're doing. I get very excited, not that I'm going to buy any of it, but seeing all the things that they're doing, or how the labels are changing, or how they're making new manipulations. And then I share through my newsletter. So if you go to my website, you'll be able to sign up for my newsletter, get a free food news you can use every week, with lots of great information about what's going on in the world of food. And I will say, it's not all bad news. I do share good news too. There are companies out there that are trying to make a difference. There are shifts that are happening. And the truth of the matter is, the vast majority of the shifts that are currently happening in the food space, there's this huge push for transparency and clean labeling. It's because of consumers like you, because you are reading the label and because you are voting with your wallet. If you won't buy it, they won't make it. So,
exactly.
Yeah, so my goal is to tell you about it so that you can make informed decisions.
And that's so important, because when we are voting with our dollars and when we are informed citizens, we actually have the power back in our hands, because as we said earlier on, they're driven by profit.
Yes.
And if they can't make profit and if they can't make money, then they're going to have to figure out a new way to trick us. But hopefully what happens is that we're able to condition their behavior so that they recognize, look, we're sick of being sick. We're sick of being poisoned, even in these low doses that, in a single trial doesn't harm a rat. We're sick of it, and we're not going to take it anymore. It's just, it takes time for us to evolve back to these more traditional pathways. And so I know you've got a lot of great resources and materials on your website that I hope people will take advantage of. And just really grateful that you took the time today to share all this with us, and love what you're doing, right? We all are part of this massive microbiome, and we're each contributing our parts. And so just grateful to share this space with you, and that we're friends. So happy Valentine's Day, and thank you so much, Mira.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you.
So good to see you. Yes. So everybody, we have heard that it is so important that we look at our labels, see what's going on, and choose foods and drinks that nourish our body in a different way, and especially without chemicals. So that is the most important thing, is that we want to mitigate the effects of not only the chemicals in our food, but the chemicals in our environment. And fermented foods are a really great way to do this, because not only can we take those microbes internally with our kombucha, our water kefir, our milk kefir, kvass, kraut, ka. Why do they all start with K? I don't know, but it's a really lovely thing. And then the other thing we can do is we can put them on our body. So we can make skincare, beauty care, all kinds of care from our microbes, from our fermented foods and drinks. And so not only are we nourishing our gut from the inside out, we're nourishing our skin biome from the outside in. We are sponges. We're constantly absorbing everything around us. And so if you are ready to get started with your own home brew, check out kombuchakamp.com. We have all of these living cultures for you to try. Of course, send us your questions. And, our mission is changing the world one gut at a time. We know we have to do it in symbiosis, because that is how the world is set up. It's a massive SCOBY, right? It's a massive symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And I like to call human beings bacteriosapiens, because I think that more directly encapsulates our relationship to these microorganisms. And so when we realize that everything truly is connected in this massive web, it's exciting. It's exciting to plug back into community. It's exciting to plug into local producers. You're going to find a local kombucha producer at your farmer's market, or maybe a few of them, and you're going to be able to connect with them. Plus, you can try the other brands at the store, and then you can make it at home. I'm someone who has done all of these things. I still buy kombucha. I love buying it. I love tasting it, but I also love making it myself and being super creative. So no matter where you start, that's it. You just got to start. Start with one thing. Start reading those labels. Start recognizing, even if you don't change anything, just reading them is going to raise your awareness and help you understand, what is it I'm really putting into my body? So that way you can start loving yourself, loving your body, loving your guts, loving this entirely beautiful vehicle that we have the short pleasure of inhabiting in this one life. And so what better way than to make friends again, to find the foods and drinks that nourish and support us, to find the plants that care for us, to find the herbs that, have supported us through this whole journey. And look, I live in Los Angeles. It's one of the most polluted cities here, and I have to have a little extra supplementation. I need to be conscious of making sure I go through periods of detoxification, because I choose to live in a place that I know has more environmental pollutants. And so it doesn't mean you've, quote unquote, failed at being alive if you require supplementation. We can hypothesize this sort of ideal state of Mother Nature, but we also have to live in the reality of the world that we're in. Cindy, yes, we do have a shampoo recipe from SCOBY. So we don't usually use the SCOBY, we use the kombucha itself, but there is a post on the website. Just type in the word spa, and that should pull up a few different recipes for shampoo, for face mask, and different things. And yes, we can use our SCOBYs on our body, and they create a really positive effect. And what's so exciting about the SCOBY is that all these different people are now finding these different uses for it. For example, they have found that using the SCOBY as a filtration membrane does a better job of removing toxins from drinking water. They've found that the bacterial cellulose can be grown to create stents in different body parts. So, you know, we're just tip of the iceberg with how amazing all of this fermentation, all this microbial magic is, and you guys are at the forefront. You are the ones making the brew, sharing it with friends, you know, helping to spread this message, because again, we have to do it together as a symbiosis. So please, if this message was helpful for you, share it with someone else. Share it with someone else who needs to hear this information. Help them find a path, a way out of wherever they're at in their health journey. And just take that first step. Take that first step. Start reading your labels. Buy a bottle of Booch from the store if you're not ready to make it. And just feel how your body starts to change as a result of including these better options in your life. So again, thank you so much for being here. I love you all. Songs of love, pure love, from my heart they flow to you. We are all one, living this divine mystery. Together we help each other grow. I'm beyond grateful to show you what I learned from the universe. It's speaking to me, it's speaking to you. And when we raise our voice, our vibration, we all flourish. Together, together, we grow together, for that is what our nature is. Bacterio sapiens can't help but evolve. It's what we're here to do. So thank you from the bottom of my